This is a story about a group of women in the late 1960s. A shared love of art and some unusual coincidences bring them together. The author decided to anchor her fiction to a real-life event in New York City that ended up being more relevant today than she first imagined.
I didn't know I was going to get into women's rights as much as I did when I set out to write the novel. But I knew I wanted to do something historical in that period of time. And I found the strike for women's equality that was held in August of 1970 when women were fighting for rights that we are still fighting for today.
This is author Linda Rosen, and we're talking about her historical women's fiction, The Emerald Necklace. In a few moments, you'll hear her narrator, Traci Odom, who has performed more than 300 audiobooks. You'll hear her reading a scene from the Emerald Necklace audiobook published by Tantor Audio. Coming up on this Desideratum. A desideratum is an essential thing. I'm audiobook narrator Teresa Bakken, and I think storytelling is a desideratum. Both the telling and the listening.
I like making my character an artist, some type of art. My first book, I have a painter. The second book, she's a winemaker. And I have a very dear friend who's a sculptor. And very often she and I will go to art shows and I hear the things she's saying. And so much of it rang true for an author.
Whether it was with words or clay didn't matter. Art was art, and that created a bond between them. "You're right," Rosalie said. "It was a lousy morning. I can't do it." "Sure you can. You're merely going through one of those tough times, second-guessing yourself." "I'm not. I simply don't have it anymore. Or maybe I never did." Frustration blew from her lips. "The hand I've been working on, there's no life to it. Not 1 ounce of humanness. No one would want to hold it or caress it, much less buy it." "Oh, I know that feeling. Sometimes I feel my characters are dead on the page." Fran took a sip of tea. "A sculpture is like a character, isn't it? Or part of a character. It's not merely a hand." Rosalie thought that was brilliant. "Only a writer would come up with that," she said.
Fran and Rosalie have a lot of tension there because of a secret that Fran holds that all revolves around the necklace that Rosalie's granddaughter wears, the emerald necklace. But in creating the women, I wanted to get that tension, the envy, through art. And I think people in general, as much as you love your friends or whatever, there are times that there's something that you're envious of.
Right. Well, you even begin the book. Your opening quote really is about comparison being the thief of joy. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is how when we hold ourselves up and compare ourselves to our friends, that envy can rob us of the joy that we would have in that friendship sometimes.
Absolutely. And rob us of the joy of the friendship and rob us of a joy in ourselves.
Yes.
Till you can recognize the beauty in yourself.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you gave that character the ability to see her success? To me, it has to do with being with other artists and being with other women who kind of lift her up. She ends up working in a kind of a collaborative space.
She grew tremendously by being with that group of artists, also at Gertrude's studio.
I think it's really integral to the book, this gathering together in the small of this small grouping of friends, but then also you show that in a broader sense when you tie into this time periods march for equal rights, this sort of collective power of gathering together is, to me, a theme in the book.
Well, yeah. Yeah. And that's lovely that you bring that out. I love when a reader brings out things that I wasn't necessarily thinking of. And sometimes it was there unconsciously.
I think the other theme for me is you're taking a timeline and you're showing sort of echoes of things in people's lives. At one point, you go all the way back into the 1917 suffragist movement, and you're working through the memory of one of the characters, and you take us to that time frame and her memories of that gathering of women with purpose for rights and equality. And then, like you said, the main essence of the story is happening in the 70s. But you also you bring us forward sort of 2 more generations, because this main character is a grandmother.
I do like multi-generational stories. And I guess a lot goes on unconsciously in an author's mind as she's writing. I know what happens to me because I would be writing and I'm putting this together. I'm putting Jill in there because I have to connect the necklace and I want to show the differences in generational thinking from grandma to Jill with the rights and what happened in the past in the 30s and in the 20s, and even with the great grandmother who was the suffragist. So that was more in my mind plot wise. And then as I'm writing it, there's so much that comes through because women teach other women. And we stand on the shoulders of the women who came before us. I like to see that in books. I really enjoy reading multi-generational stories. And being a grandmother myself, kind of hope that as they get older, I will have made an impact somehow in their lives. And so I wanted to show that how grandma did for Jill, but her mother did for her, and that's great grandmother. So, it goes on and on.
It does. It goes on, and sometimes it skips generations.
Oh, absolutely. And I wanted to show that because Rosalie's mother was a suffragist, but Rosalie's daughter is not a feminist at all. And Rosalie doesn't consider herself one at all, but she just, when it touched home, she knew what she wanted to fight for. And yet Jill was very typical of women of her age,
Yes. Yes, somewhat you show the women having sort of a typical perspective for that time frame, but others, I think that demonstrates how we are. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
You show us in this novel sort of an advancement of women's rights happening in equality, but we are in 1970 in this moment. And we know from today's lens, 50 years later, some of the conversations that these women are having in 1969 and 1970, we are still having.
We are still having today. We are still having today. Absolutely. When I started writing the book, we're still always having conversations about women's equality. But some of the stuff that I touched on in the book was law. And when I finished the book, it was no longer law. So that was a big change.
Yeah. Yeah. Did that, as you were kind of going through final edits and going into publication, how did that make you feel?
Worried. Worried. I worried. It's not a spoiler at all. The book deals with so much, but also with women's reproductive rights. And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, as I finished the book, I was concerned. I wrote a novel about envy and women's friendships and family being more than blood, and how a woman overcomes obstacles when she's reinventing herself. And then that all came in neon lights. But I'm very happy with it, actually, because it's a subject that needs to be out there. And I think for women who lived through the period of time, 69, 70, 71, they appreciate reading their own history and seeing themselves in the characters. But I've had younger women who say, it's fascinating to learn what women have been through.
Each one of these women has had different life experiences and has had different choices she's had to make. And you can't oversimplify that, right? That is very complicated.
Right. And that's so real. I mean, you bring a group of women together and you're going to get different stories and different histories and different viewpoints. And that's what I wanted to show. Yeah. I wasn't taking one viewpoint on anything, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the risks and the what's most concerning, I think, today is that it does feel like suddenly there's just one lens, one cookie cutter kind of approach to what is definitely something that each individual comes at from a different angle.
But even within ourselves, so I put it in my characters, you can be thinking one way, but then there's another thought. But what about this? You know, everybody has many sides that come together to make their viewpoints. And then you still can question.
Right. But it should be up to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there is a theme to me. It's that you have described all of these different women from different circumstances, making different decisions, and how each one of them had what was best or right for them.
Yes, and coming also, I hope readers realize it's also coming to understand that even if you don't agree with what of the characters is doing or believing, it's her right to believe that way or her right to do that in anything, whether it's her artwork or her beliefs or whatever it is. It's fine for her. It may not be for you, but for her it is.
I did want to ask you about, there's another thing that you bring in that's historical. There's this great reference to the Women's National Book Association.
I was fascinated by those women. In fact, at one time, I like history, you see. I went to the Butler Library at Columbia University and went into the archives to see their old scrapbooks and the minutes from meetings and everything. Those were really incredible women who fought their way into the bookseller world. They had stores along Book Row in New York City, but they were women. This was 1917. They were shoved aside, but they banded together and got together to march for women's equality when they were fighting for the vote in 1917, and they got together. So I wanted to put that in. For the history, I wanted to bring Rosalie's mother to life and show the difference between her mother and her, as you said, generational differences, because Rosalie was not one to go to marches and to fight, or to protest.
Yeah, I thought it was really, again, it was this reference to the collective power of women. It was, again, a banding together. To me, that sort of echoed in a lot of different ways in your storytelling.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
The last question I like to ask has to do with the name of the podcast. And I like to know from Storytellers, for you, and it can be from the standpoint of an author or someone who's invented herself many times, but for you, what would you say is most essential?
Most essential?
Yeah.
It sounds so simple, but really being true to yourself. Be true to yourself. Do what you want to do, not what society expects, what your mother expects, what your husband expects, what your son expects. Do what you feel is right. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed getting to know Linda Rosen as much as I did. I want to thank Grace Sammon for introducing us. Grace is the host of the Storytellers radio show and podcast. She focuses on individuals who choose to leave their mark on the world through the art of story. I highly recommend you search for the Storytellers Podcast wherever you consume your pods. As always, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening.